Up next, to discuss what it will take to ensure access and competition, please welcome Chip Davis, the President and CEO of the Association for Accessible Medicines, and Heather Bresch, the CEO of Mylan. Welcome back, the Atlantic's Steve Clemons.
Hey everybody, have a seat. You know, as Margaret Lowe opened today, yesterday was sort of a tense day for me. And to put myself to sleep, I tried to read this Council of Economic Advisors report on the drug industry. And it was written February of 2018. It's very interesting. And in it, it basically said that innovation and access are both important, but often at odds with one another. And the goal is to try to get a balance between them. And I think the blueprint that your industry just filed comments on and others is essentially trying to deal with both of those questions in innovation and access. So is there a zero-sum game between them, Heather, between getting a really rich R&D investment in the future base and making your generics part of your company happy?
Yeah, absolutely vital. I mean, 1984, when Hatch-Waxman was introduced and was signed into law, really the underpinnings of that was it takes both. What makes innovators continue to innovate is competition. If there's never any competition to your product, you're not investing to innovate. And why is there competition? You have to have products to go after to have something to compete against. So, we have said, Mylan's been one of the leading generics for over 60 years, and it's been based on that principle. So when it does get out of whack, I think to ring the alarm bell is to say, if that gets too skewed and it's tilted one way, you're definitely losing what has become really the bedrock of this healthcare system, especially in the U.S.
So fully agree. I think the balance going back for 3+ decades, right, it's an imperfect balance, and we're still chasing it in many ways. But I think the most important aspect of this is sometimes it gets lost, whether it's in a particular legislative or policy issue, that the branded industry and the generic industry are always at loggerheads. I like to say, having spent a lot of time in the branded industry in my career, we're every bit reliant on our side on innovation, albeit downstream. And I think they are increasingly reliant on the value proposition of generics, because if you think drug pricing is a problem now in the United States, imagine if we weren't delivering over $250 billion in savings every year.
Right. So it's great you mentioned both sides. So you've got the branded drug industry, the generics, you're in the same ecosystem. And I'm reading your comments on the administration's blueprint on drug pricing here. And you say, re-examine the role of rebates, present misuse of restricted access programs. We don't have to go, that sounds like a big rabbit hole. Protect incentives for generic competition.
There's increasing agreement on that, Steve.
But what you don't, we'll go in. But what you don't have here, which is interesting, is you don't outline the importance of keeping the front end of the industry in there, that the R&D role that those branded industry plays isn't reflected in your list of concerns. Is there a reason?
No, I think it is actually what we had referenced in regards to the fifth issue that we highlight, which is an ever-growing concern around not the importance of patents, because I think we all agree on that, but the increasing experience we're having in seeing patent abuse and patent gamesmanship. That's also part of the shenanigans when you were talking to Dave Ricks earlier, that Commissioner Gottlieb and others have begun to start messaging around. So we support robust, the U.S. has, as you heard earlier, the strongest IP in the world, and we support that. What we have to make sure of is on the back end, when that access is supposed to come to market. I thought one of the things that David Ricks said that was really profound was they want certainty about how long they have to make a return. Our members increasingly want certainty if they're ever going to be able to get to market, because for 2 decades there was clarity and certainty. You knew a day, you knew when it was coming, and you could prepare. You look at the top 100 drugs in this country, 80 of them have had additional patent extensions over the past several years. So the uncertainty on our side is certainly increasing and making it harder to plan.
Heather, you were broadcast in homes all around the country on the EpiPen issue and what happened with the pricing of EpiPen and public reaction to that. And you basically said, look, there are a lot of culprits in this story. I sort of ask people sometimes, who's the villain in your story when we talk about this? And I'm sort of interested, you were the villain for many folks. Who do you see, or what do you see as the villain in the story of healthcare pricing today that we don't get?
The business of healthcare. I think that's the villain. I mean, I think if there's such a thing, I mean, everyone who talks about it says it's complicated. I think EpiPen, fortunately, I think time has now spoken to say EpiPen wasn't a window into Mylan's business model. It was a window into a broken U.S. healthcare system.
Right.
And I think as we said here today, from reading the president's blueprints to all the responses to it, it talks about this system of no transparency. There's a price that was never meant to be paid by patients. And I think that as we talk about healthcare, it's not really care when we're not putting the patient first. And when that patient walks up to the pharmacy counter and has no idea what they're going to pay for a drug, and it changes every time they go to the pharmacy counter, that outrage is not only expected, but hopefully is what will end up being the grassroots of changing it. So honestly, the state of care here should be the state of business, because when you look at especially US-centric companies, which many in the supply chain are, and our population's growing less than 1% a year. So where is your growth going to come as a publicly traded company? Wall Street dictates less than 1% of growth. It comes by charging more. So until we have transparency that what the price is, you can be a true consumer. I say we're the best shoppers in the world, but it's the only thing we shop for here in the US that you're not shopping. You don't know what the price is. You're not being able to compare. All you know now is a list price that you should have never been exposed to, because the system over 30 years was built to incentivize the system. It was all big business behind the scenes, and the patient walked up and was pretty much isolated. Over the last 3 years, you've seen this huge rise in high deductibles, meaning what's coming out of your pocket is in thousands
So is that the
of dollars.
insurance company?
Well, it's the structure of, cost shifting. And I say we've shifted cost to the patients without shifting the benefit. And I think you've heard a lot about that point. You should at least get the benefit of your premium and insurance from $1, not $5,001. And that has to change.
I'm also interested in Mylan because you straddle so many sides of the industry. You have branded products, you have a very big pipeline in biosimilars, you're huge in generics. And I'm just sort of interested in as I think you've got 20 drugs in the biosimilar pipeline. Where do you see? I'll ask you the same thing. What's coming next that you're excited about that you might be able to tell us broadly about without violating your fiduciary responsibility? Or go ahead and violate your fiduciary responsibility. It's fine with me. But I think the broad thing is what's coming next that we aren't seeing, because you also invest in R&D, right? You're an unusual generics company, because most generics companies, I hate to say this, are a little bit not in that area, right? You're disagreeing with me?
No.
Right. Well,
you can talk me down.
Yeah. What I'll say is we believe Mylan is uniquely positioned as truly a global healthcare company. We're the largest provider of HIV medicine. 40% of everyone in the world on a HIV medicine is on a Mylan drug. We uniquely serve low, middle, and high income countries across the board, which I would say not many of our peers can say, in either the brand or the generic. And we're investing in complex products. For instance, generic Advair, which we'll hopefully have very soon, we've invested $800 million to bring that one drug to the market. So you're right, not every company can make those kind of investments. For us, it's about growing that global scale, having a global footprint, and biosimilars is the same. We're investing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars over multiple years to bring these very complex products to the market. So when you see that balance, which we right now are seeing some scary trends on pharmaceuticals, you talked a lot about 90% generic utilization in this country, and that's really been a source of savings and allowing to reinvest in healthcare. Well, on the complex side, we're seeing single-digit uptake, which is just not sustainable. So unless we let generics flow through the system the way they're supposed to, biosimilars flow through the system, there's going to be not only perversely our price is going to go up, but you're going to have an industry, a company like Mylan, say, how can I invest in these products with no return, no, as Chip was saying, no certainty of getting to market? I would say what's exciting, look, bringing access to the world's 7 billion people is a mission that I'm humbled to represent. But when I look at just healthcare overall and the delivery of it, technology and personalized medicine, I think is going to change how we treat diseases. Big data and being able to personalize, because in look at the last several decades, medicine has treated the masses, and we've not been able, while they effectively treat 80% or 85% of a given population, you're missing 10 to 15%. When we look at women's health care, immunological diseases affect women 80% more of the time than it does men, and we don't know why. So the more that we're able to use real world data, which you now hear a lot about, we're having real life experiences being able to be captured in these data clouds that now companies are being able to access. And so people like Google are able to start saying, how do we start bringing that data together and let it speak? And I think that we're going to learn a ton from this real data, and I think technology is going to play a huge disruptive role in how we treat diseases.
Chip, one of the things that I found shocking as I was delving into this topic were the number of, I don't know if they're generic firms or generic brands that were essentially going under. And that your industry, I thought your industry was thriving, but your industry is under siege because you can see the number of these products that have gone under. Why is that happening when at the same time there's so much pressure to get costs down? And I would assume, honestly, that some of President Trump's thumb on the scale is on your side of the industry as opposed to pharma. So where am I wrong? Why are so many generics going under?
Well, just to your last point first, if you look at the blueprint, there are 4 core strategies associated with the administration's blueprint. The first one is to increase competition. So as Heather was just saying, that is inherent to the intrinsic value of historically the generic competition and the promise of biosimilars moving forward. But biosimilars, we have 11 approved. We only have 3 on the market, right? With the All-Star game in town, that may not be a bad batting average, but it's bad for health sciences, right? You can't have that only 3. Yeah. And a lot of them are because of blocking and tackling procedures by the originator biologic designed to keep that biosimilar from coming to the market. So that's an issue that we have to move forward on.
Is that an FDA issue?
No, it's more actually being played out. There's twofold. It's actually playing out in litigation, right? Where even, if you are looking at certain products, high profile, very expensive, big revenue generators, they are filing a lot of late stage suspect patents that even if they're of questionable validity, is going to require a company like Mylan to go in and knock them down over years. And all the while that monopoly continues. That's number one. Number two, to your question about sort of the stability of the generic industry, in order to benefit from the commoditized marketplace that has historically defined the generic industry, you need competition between the buyer and seller, obviously, but you also need robust competition across buyers and across sellers. As sellers, we still have that. In the buyer segment, there are 3 entities that now control over 90% of the generic marketplace, these purchasing consortiums between wholesalers and large chain pharmacies. And simple economics, right-leaning, left-leaning, or center, are going to dictate that over time, you're not going to have 30, 40, 50 companies competing for the business of only 3 buyers. So that's one of the things that companies like Mylan and others in our membership are having to navigate their way through. And we actually, just one other point, we've actually begun to see a recognition of this in the last 2 weeks. Secretary Azar and Commissioner Gottlieb have both publicly said we're probably not paying sufficiently or reimbursing sufficiently for certain areas in the generic business. And the product discontinuations among us, our members, are growing exponentially year over year, which is not good for competition and it's not good for healthcare.
Well, and you can look at just the numbers. I think, say 1,000 words. If you take Mylan, one of the largest portfolios in the world, over 7,000 products. Here in the U.S., we sell over 600 products at an average selling price of less than 25 cents a dose. So what we're bringing to the marketplace is the scale, efficiency, high quality medicine. But when you look at an average, say, prescription of 30 pills, you're at $7.50. So the fact that there's zero transparency between, that number and whatever you're paying when you pick it up at the pharmacy counter, because it's dictated by so much based on your insurance, based on your deductible, based on every individual and where you stand to that deductible. And I think that just wasn't well understood when the shift happened. I think the other thing that wasn't well understood is historically there was a pharmaceutical deductible and a medical. So people understood, if I'm going into the hospital, I'm paying huge, I've got a higher out of pocket. If I'm walking up to the pharmacy counter, $100 is my out of pocket. Under the IRS rules with high deductible plans, only one deductible. So if it's $4,000 or $5,000 and most people are healthy, the only way you're going to reach that deductible is going to the pharmacy to get your medicine, and you're being asked to pay full list price, no discount, nothing back to you until you hit that deductible. And that's what the outrage is over. And until we hit that root cause, not just the symptoms of it.
So I'm going to ask you a dumb question. I mean, with the greatest of respect, I'm trying really hard for my eyes not to glaze over.
I know. It's complicated.
In your answer to that, because, you know, it is unbelievably complex.
Yeah.
How do we make this understandable to human beings? I mean, the literacy that one has to just follow what you just said is pretty high, I think. Maybe not for this room, but I find it just unbelievably inhuman. So how, you know, I'll ask you the same question I asked David Ricks. What would you do to create a broader picture so that we understand real transparency, we understand pricing, and we somehow put people at the center of this? That seems like such a long goal, but isn't that where we should be going? And what do you think we need to do? I mean, you're a powerful person in this industry.
We've got to put the patient in the center. Right now, it's a linear line, and it starts with the pharmaceutical manufacturer innovating, making the product, selling the product. And then it goes linearly through 4 or 5 different channels before it gets to you, the patient. We've got to put the patient in the middle and say we've got to incentivize for that patient not only to take their medicine, but to stay healthy and take care of themselves, and preventative all of these things that we've not really done a great job, because as a consumer, you were isolated. So when you take cost out of the equation and you don't have skin in the game, you're not paying anything. You know, you didn't know what anything cost. You still don't. How many people get a bill from the hospital and you understand anything that it says? The difference is you get it 30 or 60 days after you've already been treated. You're not turned away. So while it's still complicated, and of the 3.3 trillion we spend in healthcare as a country, pharmaceuticals is 450 billion of that out of the 3.3 trillion. We spend more than double the next developed country, and we have some of the worst outcomes in the world. Something is wrong with the equation of the patient not taking ownership and being responsible and being empowered with data, with technology, and with transparency. You've got to know what something costs, and you've got to know how to shop for it.
Chip, are any of your members or any of Pharma's members experimenting with a model that might approximate what Heather just suggested?
Yeah, I think you're beginning to see a lot, whether it's on the value-based reimbursement side and trying to, you know, get contracts, whether in the private sector, and I know there's increasing engagement with CMS. I think one of the other things, Steve, to your question about, that sort of bridges your question and Heather's comments about putting the patient in the center. You know, in addition to increasing competition, the administration wants to lower out-of-pocket costs, right? Whether this blueprint is ultimately successful is going to play out in 2 places. It's going to play out the pharmacy counter. Does the patient actually see it? Do they feel it? And then they're going to take that impression into the ballot box, right? Because prescription drug prices and costs are the #1 issue, healthcare issue across Democrats, Republicans, and independents. There's been a lot of debate across and within the supply chain about whether list prices actually matter or not. This whole concept of point of sale rebates, we're going to find out. Because as soon as we are in an environment, and you've seen some of the payers, United has announced to several others, that effective January of next year are going to start applying point of sale rebates, we'll find out based upon the reaction of the consumer at the pharmacy counter whether list prices actually do matter or not, because that's been the subject of a very heated debate here in DC for a long time.
And the one thing I'll add to this that I think is very much missed from the discussion is employers. You've got a huge payer group out there that historically has left this to the HR department, someone down in the benefits group that's responsible for the contracts that are going into place to service their employees. And I think as you now see people like Jeff Bezos and Jamie Dimon and Warren Buffett say, they're starting with looking inside as employers. I think they have over 1 million people. So when you start really looking at that, you realize how perverse it is. And I think business people in the C-suite had never really focused on that. And if we could get employers to really start asking questions as they do with their business and look at this, how their employees are getting health care, I think the employers have a huge opportunity to really start a huge movement here in how we bring that transparency and actually demand it. And as you know, things can be a little bit easier in the private sector to start bringing that transparency and exposure than necessarily on the government side of the business.
I want to go to all of you in just a second, but just two quickies. When I was reading up on Eli Lilly, I saw lots of things popping up on patent and trademark challenges they had, or issued patents or things that they had won, and it feels like a not a roulette wheel exactly, but sort of gambling in terms of the patent world. There's a sort of a certain dimension of chaos out there. How much is the generics industry affected one way or another by what I would call patent shenanigans?
Oh, hugely,
Yeah.
hugely. As we just.
And where are you guilty in them?
Well, I guess where we're guilty is trying to get rid of patents that shouldn't have been issued in the first place to allow market formation to bring access to affordable medicine. So I guess I'll be guilty of that all day long. I think, as we said, innovation hugely important. If there wasn't innovation out there, there'd be nothing to bring generics on the market for. So they have to go hand in hand. Where it becomes abusive is when not only do you have just constant evergreening, so there's no date certain, there's hundreds of patents, and it's not on the compound and the real art of the medicine that was discovered. It's on the color of the box, the color of the pill, how the pill's put into the package. I could go on hundreds and hundreds of these patents. So when we talk about, what our industry has done for this country for decades now is go and fight those and be rewarded by saying, okay, where you could be the first to market, you could help open the market, you bring that access, that competition, so that we can go reinvest in bringing things like spending $800 million to bring a generic Advair to the market.
Chip?
Yeah, just to add two things to that, I think what was referenced earlier was this issue about the IPR process. One, through the IPR process, the percentage of patents being invalidated is roughly equal to that's going through the traditional Hatch-Waxman venue. You could argue there may not be a need for IPR if there wasn't patent abuse. So I think it's important to have a balance. Right, it's less expensive and it takes less time. And the other thing that I will say is, for some folks who are opposed to the IPR process, if they fundamentally believe that, then some on the branded side shouldn't be using it, because it's actually being used very frequently on the branded side in addition to generics tackling brands.
Real quickly, finally, Heather, I'd ask you the same thing I asked David. What do you think President Trump doesn't get about these issues that would be helpful? Just real short form.
Look, I think his blueprint actually was pretty insightful on kind of getting to the complexity of the system. And, I think that perhaps what the single point of understanding the root cause, we can't treat a bullet hole with a Band-Aid, as the old saying goes. So this country's got to be ready to do the heavy lift of bringing transparency, which is not going to be easy, because, again, I'll go back to where I started with, this is big business, and healthcare is big business in the United States. Have I met President Trump? I have.
And did you have a discussion about this?
Not very much. It was not, we were pretty high level introductory, but I said I thought he was disruptive and interested in solutions, and I still think that today.
He probably liked that. Okay, let me go to the audience and questions and Q&A. Yes, in the very back. Oop, somebody had their hand up. Didn't have your hand up? Okay, right here in the front. Gentleman who looks like Henry VIII. That's a compliment. I love that show.
Sure. I'm Zach Brennan from Regulatory Focus. So I guess I'm curious, you guys made a deal this morning with AbbVie with regard to bringing Humira biosimilars to market. But in Europe, they're going to be seeing Humira biosimilars this fall. So how big of an issue on the IP front is that? And also, can maybe you talk a little bit about interchangeability and whether that might help or hinder the U.S. market?
Beautiful questions. Interchangeability, which great, but also I just want to piggyback. Where is Europe overall? Are they? It comes to back to the question: are they beating us on that front? Is that fair?
Right. So you're right. Mylan announced today that we had secured the licensing rights to Humira. We'll now be able to bring Humira to almost every market around the world, with the latest market entry being 2023. And that did bring us certainty. So we could take the legal barrier away and bring it. You're right. Europe starts, here very shortly. And it's just the difference between the intellectual property systems. U.S. has the only system that's predicated on a Hatch-Waxman model. And so for many different countries, IP timing is very different. So look, we're excited to be bringing Humira around the world, and especially, here in the U.S. in 2023. Interchangeability is an issue. I believe we have shown the science is there, the science for reproducibility, interchangeability is all there, and I think Dr. Gottlieb is very articulate on that point. I don't believe the issues we're seeing in the lack of generic uptake is because of interchangeability. It's truly much more due to the way the formularies are placing a generic or a biosimilar and being able to block access. So for us, the most important, most urgent need is to allow generics and biosimilars to flow and have access.
Other questions?
Yeah, rebates are being weaponized.
Yeah.
The reality to keep generics and biosimilars from getting preferred formulary position when they launch to the market.
Other questions? Great question. Do you prefer Europe or the U.S.? To go to his question, do you prefer the European IPR system?
I love every country.
Yeah, great. Love all our children.
I love all of them.
Other question? Let me, yeah, right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Trisha Shivas. I'm with Women Heart. And my question was, I appreciate what you were saying about increasing transparency, but my question is, how do we actually reduce complexity in talking to patients? Because I do think when you're thinking about the transparency piece, that's wonderful, but there are so many pieces that we're raising for the patients. The complexity of making all of that transparent doesn't actually always help them in navigating all of those pieces.
Great question.
You know, I would say that I think people are more sophisticated than we give them credit for. I mean, we had to believe that was the case to allow direct-to-consumer advertising. We're the only country in the world that has it, and that's been in place since 1997. So if we believed that there was a benefit in advertising directly to consumers, then why wouldn't we tell them the rest of the story? So if we want to go back in time and say, you know what, consumers shouldn't be involved, patients shouldn't be involved in those discussions and shouldn't be part of that equation, then I think we would reverse direct-to-consumer advertising. I don't know if anyone in that room believes that's going to happen. I don't believe that would happen. So to me, we've got to complement now what we do direct to consumers and to patients to give them the rest of the story, and that transparency, I do believe, would actually help empower them, not intimidate them.
Let me just ask, just to wrap up, you know, you pointed out that the state of care is really the state of business, and then that affects the state of care. I'm missing the global dimension of this. I'm very glad that this gentleman asked about France or asked about Europe. I'm sort of interested in the broader field as well. You've got a company like Teva, which is a real rival to yours, based in Israel, sort of an Israeli national champion, lots of tax holidays that they had. But I'm interested in, you know, whether or not this industry becomes one that, like a China or an India, could build a national champion, and what the dimensions of that are. Are we sitting somewhat blissfully unaware of the movements in the rest of the world?
Well, I won't speak anything to how blissful or not we are in our bubble here in the U.S., but I will say this. I think that we're 5% of the world's population, and we consume 50% of the value of prescription medicine. And I just said to you, we have some of the worst outcomes. So there are huge ways to improve this, and my belief is a lot of the developing world, these emerging markets like China and India, actually will be able to leapfrog the U.S. because they don't have the draconian infrastructure. In a lot of ways, we're fighting ourselves because of the hospital systems, the reimbursement systems that have been in place for 20, 30 years and haven't been updated. You know, Medicaid, what it was premised on. That we have these systems in place that are in desperate need for disruption and innovation. They can skip all of that and go right to really bringing medicine into patients' hands. And so when you think of telemedicine and being able for a patient in sub-Saharan Africa to talk directly to a doctor, be diagnosed, be able to screen their hand or their skin, I mean their retinas, I mean it's amazing what's happening out there, and have medicine brought directly to that village is going to change the, you know,
are you going to be a player in China and
absolutely,
India?
Absolutely.
Steve, the one thing I would add to that is just to the previous comments about the reimbursement rates here for generics in the United States. Right now, our members are manufacturing over 60 billion doses of medicine here in the United States every year. So we have a more profound manufacturing presence in the U.S. than some might think. The reality is there is a risk associated with having reimbursement levels, and it's a little bit ironic given the focus on drug pricing being such a big political issue that we're now in our 26 straight months of price deflation in the generic sector. That's good to the healthcare system to an extent, but as a Democratic senator on one of the committees of jurisdiction said to me, that's really good for us right up to the day that your industry can no longer function and continue to provide us safe, effective, and affordable medications. And so we are fastly approaching that. And from a policy perspective, we're optimistic that the administration knows that. There's a lot more Congress could do. When President Trump said in the Rose Garden when he announced it, that he needed congressional help to implement the blueprint, I'm not sure that there were enough members on the Hill paying attention to that.
Well, I want to thank you both for extending our conversation today in some really interesting directions. Ladies and gentlemen, Chip Davis, President and CEO of the Association for Accessible Medicines, and Heather Bresch, CEO of Mylan. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.